The Federal Reserve speaks and the markets shrug. Here to join us, we've got Peter Schiff, a man who never shrugs when the topic is the Federal Reserve. He's the president of Euro-Pacific Capital. Peter, welcome. Bernanke, in his release statement, they noted slightly strengthening economy. They said things are getting a little bit better. At the same time, they lowered their GDP estimate to 2.5% for 2012. Is this wishful thinking, a mixed message, or what exactly? How do you put those two together?
You might call it overt propaganda. I think the U.S. economy is getting worse, and the Fed is constantly having to ratchet down its previous expectations. And of course, I think it's a lot worse than the Fed chairman lets on, because I think there's a lot more inflation than he'll admit to. And I think one of the reasons it looks like the economy is growing is because we're measuring it with phony inflation data. I think if the data more accurately reflected the amount of inflation that Ben Bernanke is creating, you would see that the real economy is actually shrinking. And that's why it's so difficult for people to find jobs. That's why household income is so weak relative to inflation, because the economy is not growing, it's shrinking, and the Federal Reserve's loose monetary policies is one of the main reasons.
Now, Bernanke's saying that things would have been much worse. He's in his presser saying that the best reason to have these accommodative policies is because things just would have been terrible without that. Presumably he means, what, 10% unemployment versus the 9% we have now. How is that wrong?
Well, maybe to the extent that a heroin addict would say, yeah, if I wasn't taking more heroin, I'd be going through withdrawal. Yeah, maybe the withdrawal wouldn't feel as good as being high as a kite, but it's a necessary part of the healing process. By keeping the economy addicted to cheap money, he's preventing a real restructuring from taking place, so we're not going to have a real recovery. Part of the recovery process is higher interest rates, but he won't let that happen. Bernanke refuses to take that punch bowl away, and so the government keeps getting bigger, we keep spending money we don't have, we delay the day of reckoning, and we make our problems bigger because instead of solving them, he's numbing us to the pain with all this cheap money. But meanwhile, the disease is getting worse and worse, and eventually we're going to die of an overdose if he doesn't cut it out.
But doesn't the market, to a degree, set the rates? For instance, the Standard & Poor's came out and said, listen, the ratings for the U.S. economy are way too high. We're going to take it down to AA+. Rates actually went lower then. If people just want to go to the U.S. for want of a better place to hide, aren't our rates naturally going to be, what happens there? I mean, I'm confused as to how the market keeps going towards us.
The market is not setting the rates. That's the problem. And sure, S&P downgraded us all the way down to the second highest rating. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we should be junk. But regardless of that, the Fed is in there buying treasuries. Foreign central banks are out there buying treasuries. That is not the market setting rates. That is governments and central banks distorting the market. Rates are too low. I mean, does anybody really think that the market on its own would put short-term rates at zero? No, there's no way that would happen. The government is doing that, and it is creating problems. Just like the low interest rates under Alan Greenspan, that 1% Fed funds rate, that's what inflated the housing bubble. That was the consequences. We got a lot of damage to our economy. The whole financial crisis of 2008 has its roots in the cheap monetary policy of Alan Greenspan. We have to ask ourselves, what is the looming crisis that awaits as a consequence of the cheap money policies of Ben Bernanke, because he's being even more reckless than Alan Greenspan.
Now, he's got Europe over there that's a much more screwed up situation than Greenspan did. He's also got a fiscal side of the equation that, Bernanke's operating in a vacuum. There's nothing else happening in Washington, D.C. There's no check. There's no balance. You and I can talk about what a fool the guy is. But frankly, there's no governmental policy regarding the economy whatsoever. So what's it got to do in that situation?
There is a governmental policy, and that's hurting the economy more. Yeah. It's growing the government. The government is enormous. That's what's hurting the economy. But if the Federal Reserve stopped buying all these bonds and let interest rates go up, the government would be forced to make cuts, just like Europe is now trying to force Greece to make cuts, but the Federal Reserve is letting our politicians off the hook. And by the way, the situation in Europe is actually working to Ben Bernanke's advantage, because people are so worried about the euro. They're buying dollars that they might not otherwise buy, and so that's buying us some time, because the dollar collapse is being postponed by the problems in the euro. But the dollar collapse is still coming, and it's going to be that much more spectacular now because of all the extra money we've printed and all the extra money we've borrowed because of Ben Bernanke.
Can we beat the euro to zero? That seems like the most screwed up currency. I mean, the dollar will exist, devalued or not. The euro probably shouldn't exist whatsoever. Doesn't that work to our benefit if we like and neglect the dollar?
I think we're going to win the race to the bottom, unfortunately. You know, it's not a race you want to win, but it's one we're prepared to win, I guess.
Yeah, we'll do our best, and we'll keep you posted. Peter Schiff, he's the president of Euro Pacific Capital. Thanks so much for joining us, Peter.
Anytime.